lots of snow for right now.
In New York, they're showing high school.
Buffalo got 77 inches of snow.
Yes, and they were using snow plows on the roof.
Yes.
I'm like, oh man.
It was it a 24 hours they got 77.
That's crazy, and they're banning any kind of travel, cars right now.
Yeah, when they came out and said don't drive, I was like, you don't have to tell people that.
Some people still try to find a way.
They're out on their snowmobiles. They have to take snowmobiles from the house to the car to dig the car.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that's just wild.
Oh, yeah.
I can't even begin to imagine what it's like to have, nor do I want to find out. Like, I love snow, but I don't want to find out what it's like to get 77 inches in 20
So, yeah, me too. And then, so I was thinking our 13 degrees this morning, we were good.
Yeah. Sounds great. I'm not shoveling my roof.
That's right.
Do I? Yeah.
You left off with the passage last week in 1 John chapter 1.
Yeah.
And what does he mean? We're not sinless.
We're not what?
Sinless.
We'll talk about that this week.
Yeah, okay. I want you to cover
Chapter 2.
Coffee doesn't actually wake me up. So.
We had an experience yesterday. Something that was supposed to be allergen friendly and was not.
So did you find a recipe for that? Or?
Yes, there exists recipes.
He's not
No. Although I would absolutely let him try.
What was it yesterday?
You what?
What was it yesterday they got him?
We don't know. We were at a friend's house.
Well, it happened earlier
He
today
did.
as well.
So he had a reaction to something earlier. We think it's probably cross-contamination of egg. It wasn't bad, but his mouth was itchy. But there was no egg for him to eat. So it was egg grease touching one of his waffles at some point.
Oh my goodness.
Apparently caught. So then yesterday evening, we were over at some friend's house for supper, and they've got these allergen-friendly donuts that he shoveled when we've been at their house.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times.
Yep.
And the last time we were there, he said that his mouth was kind of itchy, but that was the extent of it. So we didn't know if it was the donut or something else he touched or what. So this time, again, allergen-friendly, devoid of all your tops.
Most of the donuts.
And then most of the donut revisited their floor.
Oh no.
So
It could have been something else too.
that's the thing. We just don't know.
Could have been a bug or something.
No, he's
Well,
not,
but he hadn't eaten
he's
anything
not
else
sick,
while
and
he was
he
in there.
complained that his mouth was itchy.
Yeah.
So
So
then
it was
last
obviously a
night
reaction.
in bed, he has the same. You can have rebound reactions as your body processes it. You end up having and so we end up dealing with it at 11 o'clock at night. It's like, all right, Benadryl the kid. He's hanging out with me tonight.
Benadryl works.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's not how I wanted to start class, discussing my child's bodily functions, but there you go. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'm glad that you are here with us. A couple of things on the front end. Yes, we are aware that there is a parts vehicle sitting in our parking lot. We are very aware.
And I am talking to that parking.
It's one of our neighbors who needed a place to stash it for initially a day. It has now been more than a day. The other thing we learned is that the company that we contract towing with is no longer functional. So we have a new company, but the signs are not up, so we can't. Yeah, I got to hang those. Anyway, Yeah, it's been an entertaining last week as we've tried to figure out why there's pieces of a Mazda 3 in our parking lot.
That constitutes a car.
Do what?
I don't think that constitutes a car.
It really doesn't. It really doesn't. But it goes with the other car that it matches that's currently being hooked, that it's attached to a tow chain and got towed down the street. Anyway, yes, we know it's there. We're working on it.
And those people, because we are being nice or friendly, and we know them, they may come to the pie social.
I really want Gary to bring a pie.
Yeah.
Grease
He
cream
is,
pie.
I think, is an excellent baker.
I would believe so.
Yeah.
He's a mechanic, and so every time I've ever talked with him, he's just covered in grease. All right.
Working.
Yep. So that's that. There were a couple. Oh yeah, pie tonight. If you have not signed up yet, gentlemen, to bring a pie, it is not too late. You do not have to sign up. Please bring a pie. We've got a handful of families from Sunrise, at the very least, who are going to come over and join us. Should be a good evening. This room was pretty packed last year, so we're going to make sure we set it for more people this year. But that also means we need your pie. So
And then there's soup.
there's soup first, but we're not worried about the soup. We're worried about the pie.
There is bragging rights too for the winner.
Well, we expanded to first, second, and third place this year.
Oh, there are awards.
There are awards. The Golden Roller is back up for grabs, as are the silver and bronze spoons. So, I've been disappointed in the lower amounts of trash talk online this year than there was last year. I think most of that was concentrated around art. So, I think several of y'all did pecan pies last year. There was an open conversation about whose was going to be the best. I don't remember who won, so y'all need to do that.
None of them.
No. Out of the pecan pies, who won best pecan
Did
pies?
we have a contest for that?
No, it's like best banana pudding at a church potluck. It's a competition whether you want it.
No one ever told me that mine was the best. So I was thinking that it wasn't really a thing.
Yeah, there's reasons.
Greg was one of the other ones I know. Art was at least a third, but I think there were 5 of us.
There were 4 or 5 pecan pies. I did not try every single one of them. I tried 2 or 3 of them, and I did not find a bad one.
The reason is that my wife said the pecan pie is the easiest one to make, so that was my choice.
I think you may have been lied to. The easiest one to make is the one where you go to the store, buy the can of premix, open it up, dump it in the graham cracker crust, and bring it.
Make it first. Oh, they do have the no bake one.
Yes, they do. Strategic. All right. So, the other thing to be heads up for this morning, and I'm going to try and end class a couple minutes early so I can hustle over there, so y'all hold me to that, right? Is that we have the Christ Kitchen prepackaged meals sale this morning. So when you go into the auditorium, you'll see a couple of end tables set up on the far side that has a full display of all of the stuff that they've got. Again, all of those proceeds kind of go back to them. But this is an opportunity for you to buy easy prepackaged meals and desserts, give them as gifts, have them on hand for the holiday season. I also went in the other day to pick up all of this stuff and left with a pumpkin cream cookie thing.
You didn't share it?
No.
Right?
They didn't make it out of the parking lot. Share it. I could have, but I didn't. If I had bought 2 going, I'd have eaten 2. That's how good they are. If you haven't ducked in down there for coffee or desserts or a meal along the way, take the time. They've got a nice little setup down there, and the stuff that they produce is fantastic.
So they show pies.
It's like 4 o'clock today.
One thing that they do need help with, every Thursday, one of the things they do in-house is provide a meal. Different churches or groups in town provide a meal for devotional and prayer time that's down there. That happens every Thursday. This year, they've had 2 of their 4 groups retire out, which means they currently only have 2 weeks covered, which leaves the third Thursday of the month, the 4th Thursday of the month, and any month that has a 5th Thursday, all currently vacant for meals being provided for the women who work down there for that devotional and prayer time. I figure we probably have the hands to take care of a meal once a month. Do you agree?
Yeah.
If you are interested in helping with that, talk to me today, either after class or after church. I will get your name on a list, and we will work on the details for what that looks like. We can either get together here at the building on Thursday morning and put it all together, cook it together, and take it down there, or we can part out who does what, so a dessert, a salad, and a main course, and just meet up down there and provide it. But if you're interested in helping do that, talk to me after class or after service today. I'll get you on the list, and we can start working towards that. Talking with the woman who kind of heads that up down there, she's pretty desperate. That's one of those nice things they get to do with the women who work there each week. And seeing that gap has kind of got her on edge. So if you can help fill that, please let me know. All right. We'll go ahead and start with a word of prayer, and then we will dive into text. God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the opportunity that we have to come together, to open up your word, to share our lives, and talk about your guidance and your directives for us in our world. I pray that we would seek your wisdom, seek to apply it, use what you have called us to shape our lives and to share your message with the world that is around us. God, we are cognizant that we live in a world that is not the way that we would have it. Between tragedies, between illnesses, friends and family who are hurting, God, at this moment, you know our hearts. Please, for those with whom we are hurting, bring healing. For those who need peace and comfort, God, we pray that you provide it. For those who are looking for answers to hard questions, we pray that they would find it as they seek you. It's our prayer in Jesus' name.
Amen.
All right. So we are in 1 John chapter 2 today. If you want to go ahead and turn there, you can. But first, got a short activity that I want to do with you. So you need a partner. I'm not going to make you rearrange the room to pull it off. Just find somebody who is nearby. You're going to have to move here. It will be finished in time. We'll still make it single.
Teachers are the worst.
Yes, y'all are terrible. Now move. All right, anyway.
Is she leaving?
I'm surprised she isn't. So, what I want you to do, you got to pick one person to be the talker. You're going to reverse this activity. Don't worry. Each person's going to get the chance. But I need one of you to be designated the talker, and one of you to be designated the listener. Fulfill your roles. The talker needs to talk, the listener needs to listen. We're going to have a short activity at the end of each kind of session as we flip over, and I want the talker to explain to the listener how they feel about conflict. You've got about a minute and a half to do this. You are telling the listener how you feel about conflict. On your mark, get set, go.
Well, I wasn't done. Then now you come back.
And time. All right. I hate to kill good conversation, but we got to keep things moving this morning. So the next activity, about 20 seconds. Listener, I want you to tell the talker what you heard them say about how they feel about conflict. We're going to find out how good you were listening. Talkers, let them know whether or not they got your point. 20 seconds, go. Alright, time. Alright. Talkers and listeners, your role is now reversed. We're going to do the same thing we did the first time, but now with the listeners doing the talking, the talkers doing the listening. This is what conversation should actually entail, but it rarely does in our world. So there we go. Alright, you got 2 minutes, minute and a half, 2 minutes. On your mark, get set, go. You missed instructions. And time. All right. Listeners, your 20 seconds to explain to the talkers what you understood them to say begins now. Go. All right. Time's up. You go back to your seats. Or you can stay where you are. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm not that invested in where you sit. That's not true. I've written everybody that sits at the table out of my will.
Now, wait a minute. Your kids.
And you were talking about conflict.
Yeah. Sometimes we instigate it. I'm going to die. All right. So couple of things there. One, this is one of those activities that you can expand or contract, and this is more side commentary on us as people. But one of the write-ups on this activity talks about how if you extend the time, in feedback, people will tell you that 15 minutes, you push this activity to 15 minutes with one person talking and one person listening, they'll tell you that's the longest they've ever been listened to in their lives. That says something about us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of it is cultural. I think probably a significant portion of it is. We are more adept in a lot of cases at sharing than we are listening. And very often our listening is conditioned to respond, not to hear. And so we don't necessarily seek to understand as much as we seek to correct. So if you are listening to somebody, very often what we listen for is what they're getting wrong. Which ignores a whole bunch of stuff, not the least of which is that you may have it wrong, right? Because we're also people. We're not great listeners. And a significant amount of conflict could probably be avoided if we just did a better job listening. Now, this is the other fun one for me. How many of you really cannot stand conflict? Okay? How many of you, like, conflict is your comfort zone? Okay, no part of that surprises me, Bob.
But I see conflict resolution.
So one of the masters that I considered pursuing early on, Abilene Christian rolled out a master's in conflict resolution while I was finishing up my undergrad there. And my first thought was like, oh sweet, a 36-hour master's that I could just kind of finish up in the next 2 years? I'm like, I don't want a master's in conflict resolution. I'd have to deal with conflict. Not my favorite thing. I can handle it relatively well, but I don't get excited about it. Some people are like, yes, here we go. But interesting that in this room, we run the spectrum, don't we? Conflict-averse people, there were some of you whose hands shot up quickly. There were some of you who were kind of like, yeah, I'm not comfortable. Conflict's not prone, because it's not like you're looking for it, but those of you who are more comfortable in that setting, there were some hands who went up quickly and some who went up slowly, and I figure what that teaches us is that we're all people. The other thing that I would point out from this, so it's not a lesson that you haven't learned in 1,000 other ways already, is that churches are places where conflict takes place. There are a billion reasons why that's true, but I would lead off with the simple one that it's made up of people. Is that a fair enough assessment?
Yeah.
And there are going to be things that we disagree on. Some of the conflicts that I've witnessed in churches through the years make sense as things worth having a conversation about. Sometimes we are talking about things that matter. But sometimes we're not. Does that ring true for you? So there was a church that I volunteered as their youth minister whenever I was in college. And small congregation, on a good Sunday, we'd run 45. People average somewhere around 35 or 40. A church that had been together for a long time. It wasn't a family church. They weren't all related. But many of them had been friends for so long that they might as well have been. And the conflict that finally broke, the straw that broke the camel's back for 4 or 5 of the people who were there, was the color the accent wall got painted in the fellowship area. Yeah. I know. And we could talk about how it's actually 1,000 other things that led to that moment, and that just happened to be the last straw. They never took the time to process through all of the other stuff that led up to that moment. They never took the time to have actual conversations when they listened to other. It wasn't the color of the wall that was really the problem. It was how it got painted in the first place. And like all of those things played into the situation. But if we started running down a list of things we know of churches that have gotten into significant fights or eventually split over, we end up talking very often about carpet color and building projects. Things that are not the kingdom of God. But whenever we've moved into moments of conflict, can very well become the things we place the most importance on. That's on us, misprioritizing the wrong things, but it happens. When we're reading the letter of 1 John, we're not dealing with one of those conflicts. We're dealing with something relatively significant. If you were here last week or if you caught the video, you heard me talking about that early understanding that began to split the church with those who were holding fast to what they had heard from the beginning, a phrase that John uses a few times, and for those who had kind of blended Christianity with some Greek philosophy and were doing some fiddling, trying to figure out how to take what they had known before and fit Jesus into it. And that's not surprising. For as long as there have been religious movements, there have been people trying to figure out how to blend them. You see that with the people of Israel in ancient Judea and Israel, right? Where the temple is there and they worship God there, and they leave that temple and go to the next temple, or they go to a high place outside of town where the Asherah pole is. And they're kind of mixing and mingling their dedication and their worship. With John, we've got this very distinct conflict. For John, it is very, very simple. But he boils it down, trying to help them understand what really matters and what I'm losing the entire thing. What really matters. What really matters and what doesn't. If you missed the video last week or weren't here for class, that way of thinking is called Gnosticism and put all the emphasis on what you know, these divine revelations and new things that God is teaching you and the way you understand the world. And all of its emphasis was on knowing. It assumed that human beings were inherently evil, that the flesh could do nothing wrong. So really, salvation was about knowing the right things. It had nothing to do with what you did, how you lived. That was not important. For John, for the early church community, that was not acceptable. Because there is a deep connection in faith between what you believe and how you live it out. And in fact, Jesus, over and over in the Gospels and in his teachings, puts the emphasis heavily on how you live out that faith with a constant reminder that what you believe doesn't really mean a whole lot if you're an angry, miserable person the whole way between, or if you have this inclination to just do whatever you want, but say, I know God on the side. So by the time we get to John chapter 2, or 1 John 2, John's really getting into that conversation about the gap between what they started with and what is worth believing and what others are telling them matters most. And John is trying to help them understand what to cling to. So 1 John chapter 2, starting in verse 3. And we can be sure that we know him if we obey his commandments. If someone, this is one of those loaded someones, right? If someone, where they all know who they're talking about. If someone claims, I know God, but doesn't obey God's commandments, that person is a liar and not living in the truth. But those who obey God's word truly show how completely they love him. This is how we know we are living in him. Those who say they live in God should live their lives as Jesus did. So these few verses here are all working to this kind of high point, this statement that sets up everything that's going to come after. John said, those who know God live the way that God has called them to. And what does that look like? To live as Jesus. It's a pretty simple line, isn't it? And you've got some teachings and instruction from Jesus to kind of form that out, but you don't even have to have those. All you need to know is how Jesus lived. They don't have the Gospels to go back and study those teachings. What they have are stories that have been passed on to about who Jesus was and how he functioned with his disciples and with those who are around him. They've got the early oral tradition version of what we get to read now. And all of that is pointing to how Jesus lived in response to God's work through him in the world. So, John then turns. Dear friends, I am not writing a new commandment for you. Rather, it is an old one that you have had from the very beginning. The old commandment to love one another is the same message you've heard before. Yet it was also new. Jesus lived the truth of this commandment, and you are also living. For the darkness is disappearing, and the true light is already shining. If anyone, this is another one of those loaded anyone statements, right? If anyone, someone, y'all know who we're talking about here, claims I am living in the light, but hates a fellow believer, that person is still living in darkness. If anyone loves a fellow believer, anyone who loves a fellow believer is living in the light and does not cause others to stumble. But anyone who hates a fellow believer is still living and walking in darkness. Such a person does not know the way to go, having been blinded by the darkness. So in those verses, thinking about church experience, conflict resolution, disagreements, what do you hear?
Through that conflict, live like Jesus.
Okay? John never states for a moment that conflict isn't going to exist. None of our gospel writers argue that it won't. They recognize that there are people, none of our New Testament writers, many of them are writing in moments of conflict, right? John writes in a moment of conflict. Half of Paul's letters, at the very least, are dealing with significant conflict. How do we handle it?
Because you've kind of stating that the relationship between the two people are what's important.
Okay, that's a good, that's sort of the baseline starting point for you.
Would you say that again?
Oh, just that the relationship between the individuals is what's most important, as opposed to whatever the issue is. So keeping that relationship, dealing with each other in love.
Well, because you can't really, y'all have families. Anybody ever had a significant conflict with a family member?
Yes.
What makes those hard? It's a dumb but very open-ended question.
It's our stuck with them for the rest
Okay.
of my life.
You're related. We're moving into that time of year, aren't we? Where you're going to see them. Or try to figure out how to avoid them. One of the two. Thanksgiving and Christmas. And what makes conflict with family difficult?
Being a Christian. And knowing what we're supposed to be doing.
The gap between how I want to respond and how I should respond.
You have a big history with them.
Yeah.
A large part of your life has a history with them that you've dealt with for a long, long time. So you know the good, the bad, the this, the every, it all.
Yeah. Sometimes there's lots of forgiveness that hasn't taken place.
Yes.
We're pretty good at scorekeeping, some of us, aren't we? Sometimes it goes back to childhood. Not introspectively or anything.
Wouldn't that come under forgiveness?
Oh, sure, but how good are we at that? No,
Henry, I've noticed this at startup. I was a part of a startup church.
Yeah.
And there is this period in which everyone does not have any history. And basically, we're just thinking that, hey, we're Christian. We're here to do kind of what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And that is actually serve Jesus.
Yeah, how long does that last?
Well, it actually lived, quite a while. Maybe it was a better group of people. I don't really know. Or more forgiveness, or I don't know. But it was a...
Or they didn't
3 or
carry
4
50 years of history.
Yeah. No. It is the fact that I have hurt Tony, and he has thought he has forgiven me, and it was hard for him. But then when I want to paint the wall purple, and he doesn't, then it comes back, you know?
You get yeah.
Well, and I'm going to do what you told us a couple weeks ago we cannot do,
Go for it.
but I'm going to do it anyway. And pull a verse out of a chapter. And if I go to Corinthians 13, it says, keep no records of wrong.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And Paul gives it. No, that's not out of context. That's accurate.
That's easier said than done.
Yes. Paul is giving that advice to a conflicted church. One of the baselines for how to show love involves not holding on to stuff that's happened before. But that can be really difficult to do. We are not always adept at doing so. Because it's a whole lot easier, especially if we don't deal with it at the moment. We think, oh, us conflict averse people, just won't say anything, it'll get better. Yeah.
I thought of that phrase, forgive, because you drink the poison and what it is that's bothering you does not die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why wouldn't it be easier to love one another? For love is of God.
Yes.
So, I get up, I look at the beautiful creation, and I don't know, it's reaffirmed. So,
Yeah.
I don't want to be stuck being bitter.
A lot of that just has to do with mindset on our end of things. And some of that is just decisions, simple decisions on our end on how we choose to process situations, what we choose to remember, how we choose to even think about those things. It can be as simple as the difference between giving somebody the benefit of the doubt versus remembering all of the times that they've been harsh to you before. What's causing this response in this moment?
If Patrice was here, she's not, so I'll fill in.
Go for it.
She would tell the story about Eva Lastman, who was at the temple, who was a Holocaust survivor. And Patrice talked to her one day and said, how do you handle that? And she said, I had a choice. I could be bitter, or I could be better.
Yep.
And I chose to be better. And so that worked for her.
Yeah, this is one of those moments where we can talk about cognitive brain therapy and how some of those very simple things about even just how we think about situations affects our behavior, our attitude, our outlook, and how we respond to others. Yeah. I saw a hand. Where did I see a hand? Okay. I just assumed it would be
I'm next. I'm next.
Do you want to have an argument right here? Sometimes, some people see two sides of an argument. They're just geared that way.
Yeah.
They can see where one side and the other. Some people they can only see one side.
Yeah.
So it's easier for some people to resolve or to listen to something. And it's good that in a family that you have two different people, that one can see both sides, the other one can only see their side. Therefore, it worked out for 61 years now.
Yeah. And I think that all laughter aside, like there's something important about being able to highlight the continued relationship through conflict that is true for couples whose marriages go 61 years, because those are not conflict-free years. I'm going to guess you've had a disagreement or two, based on the elbow I saw thrown just a second ago, in the last 5 minutes. Part of it is just making the choice that this conflict is not going to end the relationship.
So
I
get home, I'll remind the wife that we got one coming next year. Stand by.
We have, I think it would have. Hold it. Bob was next. I'm jumping in front of the poor man.
Oh, I just wanted to say the commandments of Jesus.
Yeah.
And Jesus. Do we take those seriously, or do we just how are we to understand this? He says here, this old commandment is a message you've heard. Yet I am writing a new commandment. Its truth is seen in Him and you. Your relationship with Jesus is very important.
Yes.
And those commands are to help us to walk like Him and live like Him.
And that's where I think the conflict for the Johannine community here is worth paying attention to. Because what it comes down to is that their disagreement is not over wall painting, it's over the nature of Jesus. There's a whole lot of doctrinal disagreement that exists in the early church that none of our early writers wade into. I don't know if we've ever taken the time to process through that, but at the same time that predominantly Gentile churches are forming and meeting in Asia Minor with very few or minimal Jewish influence, there are still Jewish Christians who are going to the temple in Jerusalem for daily worship rites there. Those are two very different churches, right? With very different functionalities and very different rhythms for daily life in the church. They see various things as important. Early Christians still participated in the sacrifice rituals in the temple. It went on for decades. Why wouldn't they? They're Jewish people with an understanding that Jesus is the Messiah that's been promised for that's part of their rhythm. Is it a part of the rhythm for Greek Christians?
I would think not.
Not even remotely. Those are two very different churches. That's not a conflict worth breaking over. They function differently based on where they are, based on who they're made up of. That's great. There's a whole lot more flexibility in congregational functionality in the Bible than we ever give credit for. Where is the conflict worth fighting over? The nature of Jesus and how you live that out. That's where things come to a head for this group. Yeah.
Well, I know, so I was raised Catholic, so things like, the color of the church wall, it never was a thing.
Gotcha.
Like, because everything's top down.
Yeah.
But when we first joined the Woodville Church of Christ, it was the first time that we joined a congregation where I was, in a Protestant denomination. And I remember
Welcome to the party.
Yeah, it was very interesting. But I remember one of the elders talking about salvation issues and non-salvation issues. And that pretty much clarified it for me. It was like, if it's really not about your personal salvation and the group salvation, why are we arguing about it?
Sure.
And so, like co-ed, pool parties, it's like, seriously, you guys have issues with boys and girls in swimsuits at the pool together? That's like a thing? Never came up when I was a kid.
That's the thing.
Raised Catholic.
The first thing we do is turn around and argue about what counts.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Very interesting idea. Like, I never was in a congregation where, in a Catholic congregation where we had massive splits.
Yeah.
It just never happened.
And it wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, you could just go to the next church on the street. Like, you didn't actually break the church up over this.
Right.
It just wasn't something they argued about.
Or it's the only Catholic church in the community. If you get outside of heavily Catholic communities, you just go.
Yep.
There's a church. I got to be careful. This is the video. There's a church not far from where I worked in Oklahoma that larger community for the area, branching community, about 12,000 people. In most towns in that part of the country, if there are 12,000 people, there are 5 or 6 churches of Christ. About the same number as we have here in Spokane. Welcome to the Bible Belt, y'all. They all used to be together and have split over various things through the years, and they have their own little places. But in this town, for some reason, there's one. I don't know how they pulled it off, but they pulled it off. And they have been able to disagree over a ton through the years and still stay together. And I need somebody to write a case study on that church. I've got a couple of friends who have worked for that church through the years, and they can't explain it because the conflicts have been significant. But somehow, in the vast majority of cases, they have been able to see the difference between what they are fighting over and what truly matters. I'm sorry, I've got to finish up and then I'll kick it over to you. What John is dealing with is something that matters. He identifies the nature of Jesus and how that impacts your life as central to the gospel. That's it. Outside of that, we're kind of wasting our breath. Expecting uniformity in a church setting is never going to happen, is it?
No.
I'm not going to be you. You're not going to be me. We're going to have things that we disagree on through the years. There's going to be stuff that you like that I don't, stuff that I like that you don't, stuff that we're both incredibly indifferent on, but somebody else loves desperately. And those moments will cause conflicts, small and big, because we're people. But John reminds us, in how he writes to this community dealing with the conflict that they're dealing with, about what is most important. And if we, as a diverse, different thought process and all of that group of people, can continually come back to and remember that what it is really about is who Jesus is and what that means for how we live our lives, then we can get a very, very long way as a church community. And I think that sort of realization is going to be the thing that heals some of the divisions that existed not only inside churches, but also between churches through the years, who, even though they agree on 99.9999% of the same stuff, have allowed that 0.0001% disagreement to ensure that they never do anything together. That's been the last 200 years of church history. We could go back a little further than that, but you get the point. There's this wonderful flowchart that I've got tucked away somewhere in there, and it's got 33 AD on the end of the line in a little circle. And the line moves in a straight line for 1,500 years. That's not actually true. There was the Orthodox Church, and Easterns, and Syriacs. But you got the line, and then just an explosion of lines. Thanks, Martin Luther, for that. And then it's a class teacher teaching church history, polity, and beliefs. And he's got a little circle here and says, this is where we came along and got Jesus right.
Huh.
One, that's giving us way too much credit. Two, that misunderstands our role. It's not to figure Jesus out, it's to live as Jesus lived. If our faith is dependent on completely understanding everything God has done, we're building on very, very, very shaky ground. It's not going to happen. Instead, I think our faith has to be built on what God has done for us, in spite of the fact that we will not understand it fully. There are aspects of God's work and God's mercy that I do not get. And yet here I am, and here we are. John is trying to bring this community back to that starting. Who is Jesus? What has Jesus done? And how do we live like Jesus? And if it's not on that spectrum, then we need to have a bigger conversation about what you're missing. Right.
Yeah, but what God has done in the past, we can expect to be done in the present and in the future. Can we not?
I would argue a little bit different language on that. I think God has worked in the past. Therefore, we can expect God to work in the present and the future. I don't know that it always looks the same. In fact, I'm pretty certain it doesn't. Part of that is just the nature of the world changing. God is not limited to working only in the ways that God has worked before. There's always more to be done. The world is always changing.
But as he works, he is a God who is with us.
Yes.
And he's a God who is for us.
Yes.
You know, in that regard. So I can put my trust, and we can put our trust in him.
Yeah.
That what he's done in the past, the status quo is not going to be. He's going to bring something new.
Yes.
Like it said here, the old commandment is old, but now it's also new.
So, I think that's a perfect example. God is love is something that the Israelite people would have completely understood. But they understand it differently, John writes, when they look at Jesus and how Jesus lived it out. That's a bigger revelation of God's love. It's what has been, but in a new way. I think one of the dangers for us is trying to, it doesn't happen on purpose. I gotta shut up, we're over time. I'll close with this. I think we make a mistake if we only look for what God has done and limit that as to what God will do in the future. One, the Bible is not everything God has ever done. It's a microcosm. It's a snapshot of God's history with humanity. Two, it prevents us from seeing new things that God might be doing, or things that God has always done that we've just missed. And that's going to play a role in worship this morning, so I wanted to make sure to make that transition. Okay, now we're done.